C'était comment ton nom? Marie. Moi, c'est Lucie.
August 2003. Paris awakens to devastating news. In a quiet hospital room, a woman lies unconscious, her face almost unrecognizable, her body bearing the marks of a brutal struggle. Hours later, the announcement spreads across headlines and television screens. Marie Trintignant is gone, taken by the hands of the man she loved. The shock is immediate. Marie was not just any actress. She was the daughter of Jean-Louis Trintignant, one of France's greatest cinematic legends. She was a mother of four, an artist whose raw talent and fragile intensity had captivated audiences for decades. To many, she was a symbol of both strength and vulnerability, a woman who burned with passion on screen while silently carrying her own storms off it. Her passing was more than the end of a life. It was a mirror held up to a society too willing to look away, too ready to romanticize tortured men while ignoring the broken women left in their wake. A few days earlier, in a hotel room in Vilnius, Lithuania, a private quarrel had spiraled into something unimaginable. The man who once called her his muse, his goddess, unleashed a violence so profound that Marie would never recover. For 4 days, she hovered between life and death, as her loved ones kept vigil, and an entire nation watched in stunned disbelief. How could a couple once seen as magnetic, glamorous, and inseparable collapse into such darkness? Why had no one seen the danger? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, who was Marie Trintignant truly beneath the headlines and beyond the tragedy? Because before she became a symbol of silence, she was a voice raspy, fierce, unforgettable. She was a gaze penetrating, wounded, incandescent. She was a woman who yearned for tenderness and recognition, yet found herself constantly wrestling with shadows, the weight of her father's towering legacy, her own inner demons, and a world that too often confused her pain for artistry. Her story is not only that of a devastating love affair, but of a destiny fractured by silence, of a woman whose legacy would become a cry for all those who suffered unseen. But the truth behind her fall is far darker than anyone imagined. Marie Trintignant entered the world on the 21st of January 1962 in Boulogne-Billancourt, just outside Paris. She was born into the very heart of French cinema. Her father, Jean-Louis Trintignant, was already celebrated as one of the greatest actors of his generation. Her mother, Nadine, was a filmmaker whose work carried the stamp of sensitivity and artistic vision. For outsiders, it seemed like an enchanted childhood, cameras, scripts, and legendary names filling her home. But within those elegant walls lingered something else: silence. Love was present but rarely spoken. Affection was felt but seldom shown. In a household of immense talent and towering expectations, Marie quickly understood that simply yearning to be loved did not mean she would always feel it. She grew up learning to hold her emotions inside, to observe more than she was allowed to express. At just a few months old, Marie made her first screen appearance in one of her mother's films. Throughout her childhood, she became an involuntary muse, watched, directed, framed by the camera, yet not always truly seen as a child with her own needs and fragility. This paradox defined her early years, visible to the public eye, but often invisible at home. Then, in 1972, tragedy struck. Marie was only 10 when her younger sister, Pauline, suddenly passed away due to a cerebral virus. The loss devastated the family. Nadine, her mother, fell into deep grief, while Jean-Louis withdrew further into his world of silence. For Marie, the shock left scars that would never fully heal. She began to retreat inward, scribbling dark poems, speaking softly to herself, and carrying an unspoken sadness that weighed on her young shoulders. Teachers described her as brilliant, yet unpredictable. Classmates noticed her refusal to smile, calling her wild, distant, too fragile. In truth, Marie was constructing an armor protecting a heart that felt too much, too deeply. At school, she excelled, but her sensitivity often overwhelmed her. While her peers dreamt of bright futures, Marie dreamed of escape, of animals, of nature, of running away into places untouched by expectation. She never longed for the spotlight. In her private dreams, she imagined becoming a veterinarian, far from stages and red carpets. Yet fate was relentless. The cinema woven into her life since infancy pulled her back again and again. She would never entirely escape it. This silent, fragile, yet determined child was already carrying within her the contradictions that would define her future: a longing for tenderness, a gift for intensity, and a destiny inseparably tied to both brilliance and pain. As the 1,970 seconds faded into the 1,980 seconds, Marie was still a teenager when cinema came for her once more. At the age of 17, she was cast in Série Noire alongside Patrick Dewar. The role was raw, unsettling, and far beyond her years, but on screen, she radiated an authenticity that stunned both audiences and critics. This was no performance polished by glamour. It was instinct, intensity, and truth. For Marie, the experience was a revelation. She later admitted that working with Dewar himself, a brilliant yet tormented actor, changed her forever. He showed her that the pain one carried inside could be transformed into art. That to truly exist on screen, one had to step unflinchingly into the depths of one's own wounds. For Marie, who had spent much of her youth masking sorrow, this discovery was both terrifying and liberating. And yet, she had never truly chosen this path. She once confessed she would have preferred to dedicate her life to animals, to healing rather than performing. But cinema, as if by fate, chose her. It consumed her, drawing her deeper into roles that mirrored her inner chaos. Audiences began to see her as the embodiment of women both powerful and broken, tender and fierce, a paradox she carried in her voice, in her gaze, in every movement on screen. Her childhood, with its silences and shadows, had prepared her for this. She understood absence, loss, and grief, and she channeled all of it into her craft. Each role seemed less like an interpretation and more like a possession. She did not act, she lived. And this intensity, though mesmerizing to others, came at a cost. By the 1,980 seconds, Marie was becoming a singular presence in French cinema. She was not a glamorous starlet, nor a carefully packaged icon. She was magnetic, unpredictable, at times even unsettling. Directors found her fascinating, especially Claude Chabrol, who cast her repeatedly, peeling away layers of her complexity with each film. The public, however, struggled to define her. She was not easy to love, not easy to categorize. She disturbed as much as she fascinated, but Marie did not care about pleasing the public. She refused the roles that reduced women to objects, rejected the conventions of what a female star should be. She smoked openly, spoke with conviction, and demanded her right to be seen as complex, difficult, unapologetically herself. In an industry still dominated by men, her defiance was radical. Her work earned her recognition. A César nomination for her role in Le Cousin in 1997, and praise for her performance in Victoire ou la douleur des femmes, a television film that confronted the harrowing realities of domestic abuse. With tragic irony, it was one of her final roles before her own life would echo the story she portrayed. But behind the accolades, cracks were already appearing. The demands of her career, the strain of raising 4 children, and the turbulence of her personal life left her perpetually exhausted. She chased peace but found none. Work became her escape, the only place where she felt she could channel her turmoil into something meaningful. It was during this restless search that she would meet Bertrand Cantat, a man whose presence would ignite both passion and destruction. By the early 2000 seconds, Marie Trintignant had become one of French cinema's most distinctive voices. She was admired by filmmakers for her honesty on screen, respected by colleagues for her courage to reject stereotypes, and cherished by audiences who found in her performances something raw and unfiltered. She seemed unstoppable. Yet behind her success was a woman stretched to the breaking point, juggling motherhood to 4 children, a demanding career, and the constant search for belonging. Then, in 2002, she crossed paths with Bertrand Cantat, the charismatic frontman of the rock band Noir Désir. Their connection was immediate, intense, and all-consuming. 2 magnetic personalities collided, both passionate, both volatile, both unwilling to love in half measures. The relationship quickly became the subject of fascination, scandal, and endless gossip. Families were torn, headlines blazed, but Marie, with her characteristic defiance, brushed it aside. She loved, and that was enough. To those around them, the couple seemed inseparable creative spirits, feeding off one another, intoxicated by their own fusion. Marie was swept into Bertrand's world, and he into hers. He called her his goddess. She saw him as a poet marked by suffering, a kindred soul who might finally understand her own wounds. Together, they believed they could transcend rules, conventions, even warnings from friends and family. At the same time, Marie was working on what would be her final project, a television film about the life of the writer Colette, a woman celebrated for her rebellious spirit and defiance of societal norms. The role felt prophetic, almost like a mirror held up to Marie's own struggles, a free, independent woman fighting to exist on her own terms. On set, however, whispers began to circulate. Marie seemed more nervous, thinner, restless. She kept her phone close, her private life intruding on the intensity of her work. The crew noticed her tension, the frequent calls, the silent arguments, but no one dared ask. After all, outwardly she was thriving, admired, still at the height of her career. In public, the image was flawless. The acclaimed actress and the rock star united by passion, brilliance, and rebellion. But behind closed doors, fissures were forming. Jealousy began to creep into the relationship. Bertrand struggled with her closeness to other men, even colleagues on set. His calls grew more frequent, his presence more suffocating. Marie, once fiery and outspoken, began to retreat, laughing off questions, hiding the marks of tension, protecting the man she loved even at her own expense. Friends noticed her growing silence, the fatigue etched into her face, the way she seemed to carry a private storm. Yet she continued forward, convinced that work could save her, that pouring herself into her roles would keep the darkness at bay. She was preparing a return to theater, envisioning a future that combined her artistic triumphs with personal happiness. The illusion, from the outside, seemed complete. But illusions can only last so long. For Marie, the light she radiated so fiercely on screen was beginning to cast a darker shadow in her private life. And soon, that shadow would overwhelm everything. By mid-2003, Marie was completing the final scenes of Colette in Vilnius, Lithuania. Bertrand had joined her, staying by her side in a hotel. To the outside world, it was the image of a devoted couple, an actress at the peak of her craft and a rock star who adored her. But those closest to the set felt the tension simmering beneath the surface. Marie appeared restless, sleepless, carrying herself with an unease that words could not fully explain. The relationship that had once been intoxicating was now suffocating. Bertrand's devotion had turned into obsession. He called constantly, appeared without warning, monitored her movements, and bristled at the presence of other men, even colleagues. On set, makeup artists and fellow actors noticed the shifts in her mood, her sudden silences, the way she seemed to fade into herself. Some even recalled glimpses of bruises, fleeting signs that something was deeply wrong. But when asked, Marie deflected with a laugh, or silence, or a look that begged not to be pressed. This is how many women protect the very person who harms them out of love, out of fear, out of the desperate hope that things will change. Marie was no different. She shielded Bertrand even as his presence grew heavier, even as the isolation around her deepened. She withdrew from friends and family, carried her pain alone, and let her work become her only sanctuary. But no sanctuary lasts forever. On the night of the 26th of July, 2003, in that hotel room in Vilnius, the storm finally broke. What began as a quarrel spiraled into something irreversible. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Bertrand struck Marie repeatedly. Experts later revealed that she endured more than 20 blows. She collapsed, her head hitting a hard surface. Inside her skull, began bleeding that no doctor could undo. When help finally arrived, Marie was unconscious, her body already shutting down. Bertrand panicked, called for assistance, downplayed what had happened, spoke of an argument, of a fainting spell. But the truth was written across her shattered face. Marie was rushed first to a hospital in Vilnius, then transferred to Paris in a desperate attempt to save her. For 4 agonizing days, her family stood by her bedside. Her mother, Nadine, refused to leave, holding her daughter's hand even as hope slipped away. Her children, too young to understand, were kept at a distance from the hospital's bleak corridors. On the morning of the 1st of August, 2003, the inevitable came. At just 41 years old, Marie's heart gave its final beat. The nation froze in disbelief. Newspapers filled their front pages with her image. Television programs replayed her most haunting roles. The autopsy was chilling. Severe brain swelling, multiple fractures across her face, No weapon, only fists, only rage. Bertrand was arrested in Lithuania and later sentenced to 8 years in prison, though he would serve just 4. For many, the punishment felt like a second injustice, a dismissal of the magnitude of Marie's suffering. France split into debate. Some defended him, citing remorse and passion. Others raged that no sentence could ever balance the loss of a woman so loved, so needed, so irreplaceable. On the 6th of August, Marie was laid to rest at Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. A crowd of mourners followed her coffin in silence. Colleagues like Catherine Deneuve, Isabelle Huppert, and Michel Piccoli stood shoulder to shoulder, united in grief. Her grave bore only the simplest inscription: Marie Trintignant, actress, 1962-2003. No epitaph, no flourish. Just a final silence, echoing the silences of her childhood, her life, and now her death. The last time she was seen alive, she walked down a hotel corridor wearing a white robe, her eyes distant, her face marked by exhaustion. She was heading toward the man she believed she loved, unaware that this would be the final walk of her life. Marie Trintignant's departure left a silence that could not be filled. For her mother Nadine, forgiveness was impossible. Only months after her daughter's passing, she released a deeply personal documentary, Marie, Mère et Femme, a raw homage filled with tender images, stolen smiles, and fragments of Marie's life outside the screen. It was not meant to immortalize a victim, but to preserve the essence of a woman complex. Passionate, stubbornly alive, her children carried the heaviest loss. To the public, Marie had been a star. But to them, she was simply Maman, their anchor, their compass. Her son, Roman Kolinka, would eventually follow in her footsteps as an actor, though he avoided the glare of the spotlight, carrying within him an emptiness no camera could ever capture. Their lives were forever marked by absence, by a mother taken too soon. In France, Marie's name became more than that of an actress. It became a symbol, a rallying cry for the countless women silenced behind closed doors. Her story cracked the wall of silence around domestic violence. It did not change everything overnight, but it forced the country to confront uncomfortable truths. Every headline, every documentary, every vigil in her name carried the same message: that talent, strength, and beauty do not shield a woman from harm, and that silence can be deadly. Yet beyond the symbol, there remains the artist. French cinema continues to project her face, her unique presence. Each time Série Noire or La Cousin is shown again, each time her voice lingers in Colette, viewers feel the same shiver. Because Marie never acted in half-tones, she burned through every role with urgency, as if each moment could be her last. That urgency, that intensity, is what sets her apart even now. She was not just a performer. She was a soul exposed, a woman searching desperately to be loved as she was, in a world that preferred illusions. We may have admired the character she embodied, but the woman behind them remained elusive, hidden, untouchable. And perhaps that is her final legacy, a reminder of how fragile brilliance can be, how easily passion turns into destruction, and how deeply art can carry the echoes of a life lived in both light and unbearable shadow. Marie Trintignant is gone, but her voice, hoarse, haunting, unforgettable, continues to reverberate, refusing to let us forget the cost of silence and the fierce, fragile woman who bore it.